I stared at the elegant cream envelope on my kitchen counter. The ornate script spelling out my name, Sophia Blackwood, contrasted sharply with the mundane stack of bills beside it. For a moment, I considered tossing it in the trash without opening it. After all, 15 years of silence spoke volumes about how much my presence was valued. But curiosity won out. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out an equally fancy card, embossed with gold lettering. My father's 60th birthday celebration. A milestone event at the Westmore Country Club, no less. Typical, I muttered, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. The first contact in 15 years, and it's not even a personal note. I flipped the invitation over, finding a hastily scrawled message, "We miss you. Please come. Love, Dad." Love. As if that word still held any meaning between us. My phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. It was Eliza, my best friend since college and the closest thing to family I had these days. "Did you get it?" she asked without preamble. I sighed. "The royal summons?" "Yes." "Are you going?" I glanced back at the invitation. Why would I? They made their choice 15 years ago. Richard picked his new wife and her perfect children over me. Why show up now and pretend we're one big happy family? The memories rushed back with painful clarity. I was 17 when my mother died after a long battle with cancer. Barely 6 months later, my father announced his engagement to Victoria, a widow with 2 children of her own, James and Rebecca, ages 10 and 12. "It's time for a fresh start," he'd said. "The 4 of us are moving to Boston for my new position. Victoria thinks it would be best if you stayed with your Aunt Martha to finish your senior year." Aunt Martha, my mother's sister, lived in a tiny apartment and could barely afford to feed herself, let alone a teenager. But that didn't matter to them. Within weeks, they had packed up our family home, sold it, and moved across the country. The temporary arrangement for my senior year stretched into silent abandonment. My college tuition checks came regularly, but calls dwindled, then stopped. Holiday invitations never materialized. I was quietly erased from their new perfect life, a reminder of a past they'd rather forget. "Sophia?" Eliza's voice pulled me back to the present. "Hello? Earth to Sophia?" "Sorry," I said. "Just reminiscing." "Well, maybe this is their way of extending an olive branch," she suggested, ever the optimist. "More likely they need something," I replied. "Or Victoria finally decided it's been long enough that I won't embarrass them at social functions." "There's only one way to find out," Eliza pointed out. I stared at the invitation again. Could I face them after all this time? Did I even want to? "I'll think about it," I promised, though I was already calculating how many vacation days I had saved up at the architecture firm where I worked. After we hung up, I wandered to my bedroom and pulled out the old photo album from my nightstand drawer. It was one of the few things I'd managed to grab before they sold our house. I flipped to a picture of my mother, her eyes bright despite the illness that would eventually claim her. Next to her was my father, his arm around her waist, looking at her like she was the center of his universe. "What happened to that man?" I whispered, tracing his face with my finger. "Where did he go?" The next day at work, I found myself distracted, sketching the outline of my childhood home instead of the modern apartment complex I was supposed to be designing. When my boss, Harrison, peered over my shoulder, I quickly flipped to a fresh page. "Everything okay, Sophia?" he asked, his eyes concerned behind his fashionable glasses. "Fine," I replied automatically. "Just working through some ideas." "Well, when you're done working through ideas, I need the Westbrook proposal on my desk by end of day. I nodded, grateful he didn't push further. Harrison had hired me fresh out of architecture school 7 years ago, and I'd quickly become one of the firm's most valued designers. My work was my sanctuary, the one place where I felt completely in control. During lunch, I pulled out the invitation again. The venue was only a 3-hour drive from my apartment in Philadelphia. I could go for the party and return the same night if I wanted. No prolonged awkward interactions necessary. After debating with myself throughout the afternoon, I finally sent an RSVP email to the address listed on the invitation. Better to face them on my terms than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd gone. As I pressed send, I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. Whatever their reason for reaching out now, I was no longer the abandoned teenager desperate for her father's attention. I was Sophia Blackwood, successful architect and survivor of their rejection. If they expected me to come running back with open arms, they were in for a surprise. The Westmore Country Club loomed ahead, its manicured gardens and Georgian-style architecture projecting an air of old-money elegance. I parked my modest Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, suddenly self-conscious about every detail, from my car to my dress to whether I should have brought a gift. "You're not 17 anymore," I reminded myself as I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. The sophisticated woman who stared back at me bore little resemblance to the heartbroken teenager they'd left behind. My dark hair was cut in a sleek bob, and the midnight blue cocktail dress I'd splurged on accentuated my figure while projecting professional confidence. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and made my way to the entrance. A young attendant checked my name against a list and directed me to the main ballroom. The room was already filled with people, the murmur of conversations and soft classical music creating a bubble of genteel celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering. I scanned the crowd, spotting a few familiar faces from my childhood, aged by 15 years but still recognizable. Then I saw him. My father stood near the bar, a glass of scotch in his hand, laughing at something a well-dressed woman had said. He looked older, of course, his hair now completely silver, new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. But he still had the same commanding presence, the same charming smile that lit up his entire face. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Before I could approach him, a hand touched my arm. "Sophia? Is that really you?" I turned to find Rebecca, my former stepsister, staring at me with wide eyes. Gone was the awkward 12-year-old, in her place stood a polished young woman in her late 20s, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. "Rebecca," I greeted her, unsure whether to hug her or shake her hand. We settled on an awkward half-embrace. "You look amazing," she said, her gaze taking in my appearance. "I almost didn't recognize you." 15 years will do that," I replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. Rebecca had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know. It's been too long. We were all so excited when you RSVP'd. Were you?" I couldn't help but ask. Because from where I stand, it seems like everyone did just fine without me. "That's not fair," she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. Things were complicated. Before I could respond, a hush fell over the room as Victoria, my father's wife and Rebecca's mother, stepped onto a small platform where a microphone had been set up. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice as carefully modulated as I remembered, "thank you all for coming to celebrate Richard's 60th birthday. As his wife of almost 15 years, I can tell you that aging has only made him more distinguished and more beloved." There was polite laughter and a smattering of applause. Victoria continued, listing my father's accomplishments, their travels, the milestones they'd shared, a highlight reel of the life they'd built without me. "And we have a special surprise tonight," she said, her voice warming with what seemed like genuine emotion. "After too long an absence, Richard's daughter Sophia has joined us." "Sophia, dear, where are you?" All eyes turned to search the room. Rebecca gave a small nudge, and I reluctantly raised my hand, feeling like an animal in a zoo as curious gazes locked onto me. "There she is," Victoria beamed, gesturing for me to join her on the platform. "Come up here, sweetheart. Let your father see you." My feet moved automatically, carrying me through the crowd. As I stepped onto the platform, I saw my father for the first time up close. His eyes, the same deep brown as mine, were wet with tears. "Sophia," he whispered, pulling me into a tight embrace before I could protest. "My little girl." I stood stiffly in his arms, not returning the hug but not pulling away either. Over his shoulder, I caught Victoria's gaze. She was smiling, but there was something calculating in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, extracting myself from his embrace. He kept his hands on my shoulders, studying my face as if memorizing every detail. "You look so much like your mother," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The comparison to my mother, untouched by the passing years, forever preserved in her beauty and grace, sent a stab of pain through my chest. I stepped back, breaking his hold. "Thank you for inviting me," I said formally, then turned to address the crowd. "It's interesting to be back after so long." There was uncomfortable shifting among the guests. Clearly, they had expected a more heartwarming reunion. Victoria quickly regained control, guiding my father to cut the elaborate birthday cake while I slipped off the platform and retreated to the relative safety of the bar. "Whiskey, neat," I told the bartender, needing something stronger than the champagne being circulated. "Make that too." I turned to find James, Victoria's son, and Rebecca's older brother, settling onto the stool beside me. At 27, he had grown into his once lanky frame, his features sharpening into handsome angularity. "Hello, James," I said, accepting the whiskey the bartender placed in front of me. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," he remarked, studying me over the rim of his glass. "That makes two of us." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Should have stayed away. Nothing good will come of this little family reunion." I raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" "Because nothing's changed," he replied cryptically. "Dad's still wrapped around Mom's finger, and she's still the master puppeteer." "Your mother never liked me much," I observed, taking a sip of my drink and welcoming the burn. "Victoria doesn't like anyone who threatens her perfect narrative," James said with surprising bitterness. "And you, dear stepsister, were always a fly in her ointment." I was about to ask what he meant when my father appeared beside us, his face flushed with either emotion or alcohol, possibly both. "There you are," he said. "I've been looking all over for you." "Here I am," I replied, raising my glass in a mock toast. "I was hoping we could talk," he continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "There's so much to catch up on." 15 years worth, I agreed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. James slid off his stool. "I'll leave you two to your overdue heart-to-heart," he said, giving me a look I couldn't quite interpret before disappearing into the crowd. My father took the vacated seat. Up close, I could see the toll the years had taken, the slight tremor in his hands, the deepening creases around his mouth that spoke of stress rather than laughter. "You look wonderful, Sophia," he began. "I always knew you'd grow up to be beautiful, just like your mother." "Did you?" I asked, setting down my glass. I wouldn't know, since you weren't around to see it happen. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I deserve that, he admitted. And probably a lot worse. Why am I here, Dad? I asked, cutting to the chase. Why now, after 15 years of radio silence? He glanced around the room, his eyes darting nervously. Not here, he said. Can you come by the house tomorrow? Around 10? Before I could answer, Victoria materialized at his side, her hand curling possessively around his arm. There you are, darling, she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The Hendersons are asking about your new boat. My father looked torn, his gaze bouncing between his wife and me. Go ahead, I told him, sliding off my stool. Your guests are waiting. Please, Sophia, he said, catching my wrist as I turned to leave. Tomorrow at 10. It's important. I hesitated, then gave a curt nod before pulling my hand free. Victoria's smile tightened. It was so lovely of you to come, Sophia. Everyone's just thrilled to see you again. The insincerity in her voice was palpable. I forced a smile in return. Wouldn't have missed it for the world, I lied. As they walked away, I caught sight of Rebecca watching me from across the room, her expression a mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. James was nowhere to be seen. I stayed another hour, making awkward small talk with people who claimed to remember me but whose names I'd long forgotten. The entire time, I felt like an outsider observing a play in which everyone knew their lines except me. Finally, when I couldn't take another moment of the charade, I slipped out without saying goodbye to anyone. The night air was cool against my skin as I hurried to my car, a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere inside. As I drove away from the country club, my mind buzzed with questions. Why had they reached out now? What was so important that my father needed to tell me in private? And what had James meant about Victoria being a puppeteer? One thing was certain, whatever game they were playing, I wasn't going to be a pawn in it. I had built a life for myself without them, a good life, filled with achievement and friendship. I didn't need their sudden interest in reconnecting. But as I checked into the modest hotel I'd booked for the night, I couldn't deny the curiosity gnawing at me. Despite everything, some small, childish part of me still longed for answers. For closure, if nothing else. Tomorrow at 10, then. One last conversation to put the past to rest once and for all. I pulled up to the address my father had texted me, surprised to find not the ostentatious mansion I'd expected, but a tasteful colonial-style home on a quiet street. It was large, certainly, but not the display of wealth I'd imagined. Mature oak trees shaded the manicured lawn, and colorful flower beds lined the winding path to the front door. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell. To my surprise, it was James who answered. Wasn't sure you'd actually show, he remarked, stepping aside to let me in. That makes two of us, I echoed his words from the previous night. Is my father here? In his study, James replied, gesturing down a hallway. Second door on the left. Victoria's out, in case you were wondering. I nodded gratefully. And Rebecca? Brunch with her fiancé's family. He rolled his eyes. Gotta maintain those social connections. The bitterness in his tone puzzled me. You don't get along with your sister? I asked. James snorted. Rebecca's fine when she's not trying to be mom's mini-me. She has her moments of independence. He paused, studying me. Like inviting you to Dad's party. That was Rebecca's idea? I asked, surprised. She's the one who found you, he confirmed. Hired a private investigator and everything, once she realized how sick Dad is. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sick? What are you talking about? James's expression shifted from casual cynicism to genuine confusion. You don't know? I thought that's why you came. I came because I got an invitation, I said slowly. What's wrong with Dad? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. That's not my place to say. You should talk to him. With mounting dread, I made my way to the study. The door was ajar, and I could see my father seated at a large mahogany desk, poring over some papers. He looked up as I knocked softly on the doorframe. Sophia, he said, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. You came. I said I would. I stepped into the room, taking in the leather-bound books lining the walls, the framed family photos on the desk, photos that didn't include me. Please, sit, he gestured to a comfortable chair opposite his desk. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Tea? I'm fine, I said, perching on the edge of the chair. James said you're sick. My father shot a glance toward the door, his expression momentarily flashing with irritation. That boy never could keep a secret, he muttered, then sighed. But yes, that's part of what I wanted to discuss with you. What is it? I asked, my heart pounding despite my determination to remain detached. He shuffled some papers on his desk, then looked me in the eye. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hit me like a physical blow. Memories of my mother's deterioration, the pain, the surgeries, the hopeless prognosis, came flooding back. How long? I managed to ask. 6 months, maybe less, he replied, his voice steady but resigned. I've tried all the standard treatments, but it's spread too far. I sat back in the chair, struggling to process this information. For years, I'd carried the weight of his abandonment, nurturing my resentment like a precious flame. I'd imagined confronting him someday, making him understand the depth of his betrayal. But not like this. Never like this. I'm sorry, I said finally, not sure if I was apologizing for his diagnosis or for the complicated feelings warring inside me. Don't be, he said with a sad smile. In many ways, I deserve this. It's fitting, really, your mother died of cancer, and now so will I, poetic justice. Don't say that, I protested automatically. Whatever my feelings toward him, I wouldn't wish such suffering on anyone. It's true, though, he insisted. I failed her, and I failed you. And I've spent 15 years trying to convince myself that I did the right thing, that you were better off without the complications of our new blended family. He paused, his eyes searching mine. But the truth is, I was a coward. I let Victoria convince me that a clean break would be easier for everyone. I stared at him, anger bubbling up through my shock. Easier? For whom? It certainly wasn't easier for me, being shipped off to Aunt Martha while you started your new perfect life. I know, he said, his shoulders slumping. It was easier for me. For Victoria. She never wanted a stepdaughter, especially one who reminded her so much of her predecessor. So you just erased me, I said, my voice breaking. Out of sight, out of mind. I told myself it was temporary, he continued, his gaze dropping to his hands. That once you were settled in college, we'd reconnect. But time passed, and it became harder and harder to bridge the gap. How could I explain the inexcusable? I laughed bitterly. So instead, you said nothing for 15 years, and now that you're dying, you want absolution? Is that it? No, he said firmly, looking up at me again. I don't expect or deserve your forgiveness, Sophia. But I do need to make amends as best I can. He reached for a folder on his desk and slid it toward me. This is what I really wanted to discuss with you. I opened the folder to find legal documents, my father's will, according to the header. Skimming the contents, I felt my eyes widen. There, in black and white, was the directive that 50% of his considerable estate would go to me, with the remaining 50% split equally between James and Rebecca. Dad, I don't. It's what your mother would have wanted, he cut me off. And it's what I want. I've already set up a trust that Victoria can't touch. The house, the investments, the business shares, they'll all be divided according to those terms. I closed the folder, pushing it back toward him. I don't want your money. I know you don't, he said with a sad smile. You've made a life for yourself without any help from me. But this isn't about what you want, it's about what's right. Before I could respond, the study door burst open. Victoria stood there, her face contorted with fury. What are you doing? She demanded, stalking into the room. Richard, you promised you wouldn't do this. My father didn't flinch at her rage. I promised I would review the documents with my lawyer before making any changes, he corrected her. And I did. Everything is in order. Victoria turned her venomous gaze on me. You, she hissed. I knew we should never have invited you. 15 years of silence, and suddenly you're back the moment there's money to be had. I rose from my chair, meeting her glare with one of my own. I didn't know about any of this until 5 minutes ago, I said evenly. And frankly, I don't want it. Oh, please, she scoffed. Do you expect me to believe that? The abandoned daughter returns just in time to reclaim her inheritance? How convenient. That's enough, Victoria, my father's voice cut through her tirade. Sophia is my daughter, and she will be treated with respect in this house. Your daughter? Victoria laughed incredulously. The one you haven't seen or spoken to in 15 years? The one who couldn't even be bothered to call on holidays or birthdays? That was my decision, not hers, my father said firmly. And I've lived with the consequences of it every day since. I looked between them, suddenly realizing I was witnessing a well-worn argument. How long have you been planning this? I asked my father. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Since the diagnosis. It made me reassess a lot of things. And I assume Victoria didn't approve, I guessed. Of course I didn't approve, she snapped. James and Rebecca have been here, caring for him, supporting him through his treatments. Where were you? Where he sent me, I replied simply, turning back to my father. I didn't come here for money, and I don't need it to move forward with my life. Keep it in the family you chose. I moved toward the door, but my father's voice stopped me. Sophia, wait. Please. He stood, supporting himself against the desk. There's something else. Victoria made a sound of protest, but he silenced her with a look. Something your mother left for you. Something I should have given you years ago. He crossed to a painting on the wall, a landscape I recognized from our old house, and swung it forward to reveal a small wall safe. After entering the combination, he withdrew a velvet box and an envelope. Your mother asked me to give you these on your 21st birthday, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Another promise I failed to keep. I took the items with trembling hands, recognizing my mother's elegant handwriting on the envelope. Open them later, when you're alone, he advised. They were meant just for you. I nodded, clutching the box and envelope to my chest. I should go, I said, suddenly desperate for fresh air, for space to process everything. Will you come back? My father asked, the question hanging in the air between us like a fragile thread. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man who had abandoned me, but a dying man grasping for reconciliation before it was too late. I don't know, I answered honestly. I need time to think. He nodded, accepting this. Whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm proud of the woman you've become, Sophia. Even though I had no hand in it. I left then, brushing past Victoria without another word. In the hallway, I nearly collided with James, who was clearly eavesdropping. That went about as well as expected, he remarked. Did you know about this? I demanded. The will, the inheritance? He shrugged. I suspected. Dad's been updating his legal documents for months, and Victoria's been on the warpath about it. Didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. And you're okay with it? With me suddenly getting half of everything? James's lips corked in a rueful smile. Honestly? Yeah. Maybe because I never expected much from them to begin with. He glanced toward the study, lowering his voice. Besides, you should have seen Victoria's face when the lawyer first brought up the changes. Worth every penny just for that. Despite everything, I found myself laughing, a sharp, surprised sound that echoed in the hallway. You really don't like your mother, do you? I love her because she's my mother, he said carefully. I don't like who she is as a person. There's a difference. I nodded, understanding that distinction all too well. For what it's worth, James added, I'm sorry for what happened to you. When we were kids, Mom told us you didn't want to be part of our family, that you chose to stay behind. I was too young to question it then, but I've had my doubts for a long time. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by this unexpected ally. I should go. Will you come back? He asked, echoing my father's question. I clutched my mother's gifts tighter. I don't know yet. As I walked to my car, the weight of the velvet box and envelope seemed to grow heavier with each step. Whatever they contained, they were the last connection to my mother, a message from beyond the grave, preserved for 15 years. In the privacy of my hotel room, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, written in my mother's familiar handwriting. The date at the top showed it had been written just weeks before her death. My darling Sophia. If you're reading this, I'm no longer with you, and you've reached the milestone of your 21st birthday. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there to celebrate with you, to see the amazing young woman you've undoubtedly become. There are so many things I want to tell you, so much wisdom I wish I could impart. But most importantly, I want you to know how deeply, fiercely, and completely you are loved. From the moment you were placed in my arms, you became the center of my universe, my greatest joy and proudest achievement. Your father feels the same way, though he may struggle to show it after I'm gone. Grief does strange things to people, sweetheart. It can make them retreat when they should reach out, hide when they should seek comfort. Please be patient with him. Underneath his stoic exterior beats a heart that adores you. In the velvet box, you'll find my mother's sapphire necklace, the one you've always admired. It's been passed down through generations of women in our family, and now it belongs to you. Wear it and remember that you carry the strength of all those who came before you. Life will not always be kind, my darling girl. There will be moments of heartbreak, disappointment, and loss. But there will also be joy, love, and triumph. Embrace it all. Feel it all. It's what makes us human. Above all, remember that forgiveness is not weakness, it's the ultimate strength. Forgive others not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. I love you beyond words, beyond time, beyond the constraints of this failing body. You are, and always will be, my greatest blessing. All my love. Mom. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter, hearing my mother's voice in every word, feeling her presence beside me. With trembling fingers, I opened the velvet box to find the sapphire necklace I remembered so well, a deep blue stone set in intricate silver filigree. It had always seemed magical to me as a child, catching the light and transforming it into deep ocean depths. I fastened it around my neck, the weight of it both familiar and strange. Looking in the mirror, I could almost see my mother's reflection superimposed over mine, same dark hair, same determined chin, same resilient spirit. Forgiveness is not weakness, it's the ultimate strength. My mother's words echoed in my mind as I considered what to do next. Could I forgive 15 years of absence? Of silence? Of missed milestones and abandoned responsibilities? I wasn't sure. But as I fingered the sapphire pendant, I realized I owed it to my mother, and perhaps to myself, to try. The morning air was crisp as I walked up the path to my father's house again, the dew-damp grass soaking the hem of my jeans. It was barely 8 o'clock, but I knew from experience that my father had always been an early riser. James answered the door again, this time in rumpled pajamas, his hair sticking up at odd angles. "Sophia," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing here at this ungodly hour? Is Dad awake?" I asked, ignoring his question. "Yeah, he's in the sunroom, having coffee. Victoria's still asleep, if that makes a difference." It did, though I didn't admit it. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside, yawning widely. "Be my guest. I'm going back to bed." I found my father exactly where James had said, seated in a wicker chair by the windows, a mug of coffee in his hand and a newspaper spread before him. He looked up as I entered, surprise and pleasure lighting his tired face. "Sophia. I didn't expect to see you again so soon." I read Mom's letter, I said without preamble, my hand instinctively going to the sapphire at my throat. And I kept thinking about what she would want me to do in this situation. He set down his mug, his eyes fixed on the necklace. "She would want you to be happy," he said softly. Whatever that meant. "She would want me to forgive you," I corrected him, taking the seat across from him. "But she would also want me to be honest about how much you hurt me." He nodded, accepting this. I deserve that honesty. And so I told him. All of it. The pain of being sent away as if I were an inconvenience. The humiliation of explaining to friends why I wasn't going with my father to Boston. The hollow feeling of spending holidays with Aunt Martha, both of us pretending we weren't just making the best of a bad situation. The graduations without a parent in the audience. The birthdays marked only by impersonal checks in the mail. The slow, agonizing death of hope as I realized no one was coming back for me. Throughout it all, my father listened, his face a mask of grief and regret. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to defend himself, didn't look away from the damage he had caused. When I finally fell silent, tears streaming unchecked down my face, he reached across the small table and took my hand in his. "I have no excuse," he said, his voice raw. Only the feeble explanation that I was drowning in grief and grasping at any lifeline. Victoria offered a fresh start, away from the memories that haunted our old house. I told myself you would be better off without my broken version of parenting. He paused, squeezing my hand. But the truth is, I was a coward. I couldn't face my own pain, so I ran from it, and from you. It was the greatest mistake of my life, and I've spent 15 years paying for it with regret. I wiped my tears with my free hand. Why didn't you ever call? Or write? Even just to check in? At first, it was too painful, he admitted. Then, as time passed, it became easier to maintain the distance than to bridge it. What could I possibly say that would make up for my absence? Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone, I would think about contacting you, but the magnitude of what I'd done always seemed too great to overcome. So why now? I asked, the question that had been burning in me since the invitation arrived. Is it just because of the cancer? Partly, he acknowledged. Nothing clarifies your mistakes quite like a terminal diagnosis. But also because Rebecca found you. Found me? I echoed, confused. She tracked you down, he explained. Showed me your website, your achievements, the buildings you've designed. She's been following your career for years, it turns out. When she learned about my diagnosis, she insisted it was time to make amends. I digested this information, remembering James's comment about Rebecca hiring a private investigator. I had no idea. Rebecca has her mother's determination, but a much kinder heart, my father said with a small smile. She's the one who convinced me to reach out, though I suspect she had to work on Victoria even harder than on me. Victoria didn't want me here, I guessed. Victoria has always been protective of what she sees as hers, my father said carefully. Including this family. A voice from the doorway interrupted us. I see your prodigal daughter has returned. Victoria stood there, wrapped in an expensive silk robe, her face carefully arranged into a neutral expression. I was just leaving, I said, rising from my chair. No, stay, Victoria surprised me by saying. We should clear the air. She stepped fully into the room, taking a seat beside my father. I won't pretend I welcomed you with open arms 15 years ago. The truth is, I wanted a fresh start with Richard, without constant reminders of his first marriage. So you manipulated him into abandoning his only child? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Victoria had the grace to look ashamed. I suggested what I thought was best for everyone. I never imagined he would cut ties so completely. My father reached for her hand. That was my failing, not Victoria's. The choice was ultimately mine. I fingered my mother's necklace, drawing strength from it. I didn't come here for revenge or money. I came because I wanted answers. And now that you have them, my father asked, hope flickering in his tired eyes. Now I need time, I said honestly. I can't erase 15 years of hurt overnight. But I'm willing to try. That's all I can ask, he said, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. As I drove back to Philadelphia that afternoon, my mind was a tempest of conflicting emotions. The wounds were still raw, the betrayal still real. But beneath the pain, a tiny seed of possibility had taken root. I thought of my mother's words, forgiveness is not weakness, it's the ultimate strength. Perhaps I wasn't ready to fully forgive yet. But I could take small steps toward healing, for my sake as much as his. When I reached my apartment, I sent a simple text to my father, I'll visit next weekend. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, we'll be waiting. Thank you, Sophia. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning.